A single mother walked into a billion-dollar company for a job interview with her 5-year-old son sitting on her hip. Less than 10 minutes after she sat down in the waiting room, a message from HR landed on the CEO's desk. It didn't say she lacked experience. It didn't say she arrived late. It didn't say she was unqualified. It was just one line, and that one line told him this interview would be unlike any he'd ever conducted, because in that moment, he made a decision that would change not just her life, but everything he thought he'd built over the last 20 years. 41-year-old Kevin Brown had built everything a man was supposed to want. His corner office sat on the 47th floor of a glass tower in downtown Atlanta, the kind of building that made people on the sidewalk tilt their heads back just to find the top. His desk was solid walnut custom-built $14,000. His suit was Tom Ford charcoal gray, $5,200. A framed photograph of him shaking hands with the mayor hung on the wall behind his chair, right next to the Forbes feature from 3 years ago that called him one of the most influential black entrepreneurs under 45. He was the CEO and founder of Brown Pinnacle Solutions, a workforce management company valued at $1.7 billion. He had a penthouse in Buckhead, a vacation home in Martha's Vineyard, a car collection that included a Porsche Cayenne he rarely drove, and a Mercedes S-Class that his driver kept spotless 6 days a week. His watch alone cost more than what most of his entry-level employees earned in a year. He'd grown up sharing a mattress with his mother on the floor of a one-bedroom apartment in Bankhead. But Kevin didn't talk about that. Not anymore. Not in interviews, not at galas, not even to himself. He'd buried that chapter of his life, the way some people bury old photographs. Deep, face down, covered with enough success to make the weight feel permanent. His mother, Dorothy Brown, had been a cleaning lady. She scrubbed office floors for 23 years, mopped hallways, emptied trash cans, wiped down conference tables where men in suits made decisions about the kind of people they'd never bother to know. She raised Kevin alone. No husband, no family close enough to help, no safety net. And on nights she couldn't find anyone to watch him, she brought him along. Kevin sat in hallways and break rooms and supply closets doing homework, while his mother cleaned buildings she could never afford to live in. He remembered the smell of industrial bleach and floor wax. He remembered the hum of vacuum cleaners at midnight. He remembered Dorothy pausing between rooms to check his math homework, her hands raw and cracked, still finding time to say, "You're going to sit behind one of these desks someday, baby. Not under them, behind them." She died of a heart attack when Kevin was 26, 3 months before he secured his first round of funding. Now, sitting in his $14,000 chair in his $5,000 suit on the 47th floor of a building that bore his company's name, Kevin had learned to think of that past as a closed chapter. Not a foundation. A chapter. One he'd survived, one he'd escaped, one he never intended to revisit. The man who'd taught him to think that way was Reginald Hayes, 63 years old, Chief Operating Officer. The man who'd believed in Kevin's business plan when no bank would return his calls. Reginald had mentored Kevin from the very beginning, shaped his instincts, sharpened his judgment, taught him how to read people the way investors read balance sheets. And Reginald had one rule he repeated like scripture. Personal chaos is a preview of professional chaos. Never hire someone who can't keep their own house in order. Kevin had carried that lesson for 15 years. It lived in his hiring philosophy, in his management style, in the way he evaluated every person who walked through his door. If your life was messy, your work would be messy. If you couldn't solve your own problems, you couldn't solve the company's problems. Clean house first, then come talk business. It was efficient. It was logical. It had never once been questioned. And it had never once made room for a woman like Dorothy Brown who scrubbed floors with a child sleeping in the hallway because she had no other choice. On the corner of Kevin's desk, partially hidden behind a stack of quarterly reports and a crystal paperweight shaped like a mountain peak, sat a small photograph in a tarnished silver frame. Dorothy, wearing her cleaning uniform dark blue with the company logo stitched above the pocket, smiling wide her arm around 7-year-old Kevin, who was missing 2 front teeth and holding a spelling test with a gold star. The photograph faced the wall. It had faced the wall for years. Kevin couldn't remember exactly when he'd turned it around. He just knew that at some point looking at his mother's smile made him feel something he didn't have time for. something that felt too much like guilt. 29-year-old Shaniqua Collins lived in a studio apartment in southeast Atlanta, 460 square feet. Rent, $1,100 a month. She was 2 months behind. The refrigerator held half a carton of eggs, a jar of peanut butter with maybe 3 servings left, a gallon of milk that would expire in 2 days, and a bag of white bread. The kitchen counter was clean. The sink was empty. And next to the toaster sat a stack of envelopes, bills and collection notices, and a final warning from the landlord, all arranged in a neat pile, edges aligned, sorted by due date. Shaniqua kept things in order. Even when everything around her was falling apart, she kept things in order. Because order was the last thing she could control. 4 months ago, she'd been an administrative coordinator at a healthcare staffing company in Midtown. 4 years on the job. Employee of the quarter twice. She managed scheduling for 43 field nurses, handled compliance paperwork, trained new hires, kept the office running like a machine that didn't know how to break down. Then the company lost a major contract. 200 positions were eliminated in a single afternoon. Shaniqua's desk was cleared by 4:15. Her final paycheck arrived 8 days later, $612 after taxes. Her ex-husband, Caleb's father, had left when she was 5 months pregnant. No warning, no forwarding address, no child support. Just a gap in the bed where a man used to sleep and a growing child who would never know why his father's name felt like a locked door. 4 months of job applications, 87 submissions, 14 callbacks, 6 interviews, 0 offers. Not because she wasn't qualified, she was overqualified for half of them. But hiring managers saw the gap in her resume. They saw single mother written between the lines of every scheduling conflict and every request for flexibility. They saw risk. And risk didn't get second interviews. Now the rent was 9 days from due. Her savings account held $41. The electricity bill sat third in that neat stack on the counter. Caleb needed new shoes. His left sole had started to separate from the rubber, flapping like a small mouth every time he walked, and he'd started curling his toes to keep it closed because he didn't want his mother to worry. He was 5 years old, and he was already learning to hide his needs so his mother wouldn't break. "Mama, are we going to be okay?" He asked that question the way children ask about the weather. Casual, trusting, as if the answer was always yes, and he just wanted to hear her say it. Shaniqua knelt down, held his face in both hands, and smiled with everything she had left. "We're going to be just fine, baby." That night, after Caleb fell asleep on the pull-out couch they shared, Shaniqua stood in the kitchen and ironed her blazer, her only blazer. Navy blue, bought at a thrift store 2 years ago for $9. The iron had stopped working 3 weeks earlier, so she boiled water in a pot, held the blazer over the steam, and pressed the fabric flat with the back of a wooden spoon, working crease by crease, section by section, until the lapels lay smooth and the shoulders sat even. She hung it on the back of the front door. Then she stood in front of the bathroom mirror and practiced, "Thank you for this opportunity. I'm confident I can bring value to your team." She said it 5 times, adjusted her posture, softened her tone, tried to sound like a woman who had options, not a woman standing on the edge of eviction with $41 and a child who was curling his toes to keep his shoes from falling apart. At 11:43, she turned off the bathroom light, walked to the pull-out couch where Caleb slept, his small body curled around a stuffed dinosaur missing one eye. She brushed the hair from his forehead. "Tomorrow's going to be different, baby," she whispered. "I promise." 6:15 the next morning. Shaniqua was already dressed. Blazer pressed. Hair pulled back neat. Resume printed on the last 2 sheets of paper in the apartment. Caleb was still asleep on the pullout, and in 45 minutes Brenda Foster from apartment 312 was supposed to come watch him until noon. Shaniqua picked up her phone and dialed Brenda's number. It rang 4 times. Voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. A 3rd time. Voicemail. At 6:31, her phone buzzed. A text from Brenda. "Baby, I am so sorry. Been up all night sick. Fever and chills. I can barely stand. I can't take Caleb today. I'm really sorry." Shaniqua read the message twice. Then she stood in the middle of her kitchen, phone in hand, and scrolled through her contacts. Every name was a door that wouldn't open. Her sister Tanya lived in Columbus, Ohio, 400 miles away. Her friend Keisha from the old job hadn't answered a call in 6 weeks. The daycare center on Glenwood required 2 weeks advance registration and $85 a day she didn't have. Her neighbor across the hall worked mornings. The church daycare didn't open until 10. She scrolled past every name. 37 contacts. Not a single one could help her in the next 90 minutes. Her interview was at 9. The bus ride took 52 minutes. She needed to leave by 7:40 at the latest. And her 5-year-old son had nowhere to go. She could call the company, reschedule, explain the situation. But this position had taken 3 weeks to land. 87 applications to get here. The HR coordinator who'd called her had said, "We're interviewing 4 candidates this week. Friday is the only slot available." Today was Friday. If she didn't go today, there wouldn't be another chance. The rent was due in 9 days. There was no plan B. Caleb appeared in the kitchen doorway, rubbing his eyes, dinosaur tucked under one arm. "Mama, where are we going today?" Shaniqua looked at her son, then at the blazer hanging on the door, then at the landlord's final notice sitting third from the top in that neat stack on the counter. She knelt down. "Baby, you're gonna come with Mama today. To a really important meeting. Can you be super quiet and super good for me?" Caleb nodded, his face serious. Like a spy, despite everything, Shaniqua almost smiled. Exactly like a spy. She packed his Spider-Man backpack with precision. 2 coloring books, a box of crayons, 24 count, 6 of them broken but still usable, 2 juice boxes apple, a bag of goldfish crackers, his kid headphones with the cracked left ear cup held together with tape, and the old iPad loaded with 3 episodes of Bluey and a puzzle game he could play for hours. Every single item chosen to buy silence. Every single item chosen to buy time. Every single item proof that this was not a woman being careless. This was a woman preparing for battle with the only weapons she had. She zipped the backpack, slung it over one shoulder, took Caleb's hand, and walked out the door. She wasn't being irresponsible. She was being a mother with no other choice, walking into a room that wasn't built for women like her, carrying everything she had, including a 5-year-old who still believed his mama could do anything. The lobby of the Brown Pinnacle Solutions headquarters was built to make people feel small. That was the point. 30-foot ceilings, Italian marble floors polished to a mirror shine, a reception desk made of black granite that stretched 12 feet wide, staffed by 2 women in matching charcoal blazers with name badges and practiced smiles. The atrium flooded with natural light from floor-to-ceiling glass panels. A steel sculpture of interlocking circles hung from the ceiling, modern art that cost more than most people's houses. Men and women crossed the floor in tailored suits, carrying leather briefcases and stainless steel coffee tumblers, their shoes clicking in rhythm against stone like a metronome counting wealth. Shaniqua walked in carrying a Spider-Man backpack, holding the hand of a 5-year-old in a dinosaur t-shirt and sneakers with a flapping sole. Caleb's head tilted back. His eyes went wide, roaming the ceiling, the sculpture, the glass, the sheer impossible height of everything around him. "Mama," he whispered, tugging her hand. "Is this a castle?" Shaniqua squeezed his fingers. "Something like that, baby. Stay close." She approached the reception desk spine, straight, chin level, every muscle in her body working to project a confidence she did not feel. "Good morning. My name is Shaniqua Collins. I have a 9 o'clock interview with Pamela Washington in Human Resources." The receptionist smiled, looked at Shaniqua, then her eyes dropped to Caleb, then back to Shaniqua. The smile didn't disappear, but it changed. Tightened. Became the kind of smile people wear when they're calculating how to say something uncomfortable. "Of course. Just one moment, please." She picked up the phone, spoke quietly. Shaniqua caught fragments. "The 9 o'clock candidate." Pause. "Yes, but there's a..." Pause. "She has a child with her." The receptionist hung up. "Someone will be right down. Please have a seat." Shaniqua sat in the waiting area. Caleb climbed into the chair next to her, his feet dangling 6 inches above the floor. He pulled out a coloring book and opened to a page with a rocket ship. He selected a blue crayon and began to color, tongue poking out slightly, completely absorbed. 7 minutes later, Pamela Washington stepped out of the elevator. 52 years old, slim build, cream-colored blouse, pearl earrings. The kind of woman who'd spent 30 years in corporate HR perfecting the art of delivering bad news with a gentle voice. She spotted Shaniqua immediately. Professional smile warm practiced. Then, she saw Caleb. The smile held, but something behind her eyes shifted. A recalculation. A quiet alarm. "Miss Collins," she said, extending her hand. "Yes, thank you for having me." Pamela shook her hand, then glanced at Caleb again. He didn't look up from his coloring book. "Miss Collins, I'm afraid we don't normally." She paused. Started again. "This isn't really a situation we've..." Another pause. "Is there someone who could perhaps watch him while we..." Shaniqua felt the heat rise in her chest. The shame she'd been carrying all morning pressed against her ribs like a fist, but she didn't let it reach her face. "I understand this isn't ideal," she said quietly. "My babysitter got sick this morning. I had no backup. He'll be quiet. He has everything he needs. I just need 30 minutes, please." Pamela looked at Caleb. Looked at the Spider-Man backpack. Looked at the coloring book, the crayons, the juice box already set neatly on the armrest. She looked at Shaniqua's blazer, pressed and clean, and the resume folder held firmly against her side. This wasn't a woman who'd shown up unprepared. This was a woman who'd prepared for everything she could and still got hit by the one thing she couldn't control. Pamela glanced over her shoulder at the lobby where 2 employees had slowed their walk to observe. She made a decision not out of compassion but out of efficiency. A scene in the lobby was worse than a child in the conference room. "Follow me, please." They stepped into the elevator. Caleb held his coloring book against his chest with one hand and reached for Shaniqua's hand with the other. As the doors closed, he looked up at her. "Mama, are we gonna be okay?" Shaniqua squeezed his hand. "We're gonna be just fine, baby." The elevator climbed toward the 47th floor, and with every floor, it passed. Shaniqua felt the distance between her world and this one stretch wider until the gap felt less like a number and more like a canyon. She was expected to cross on nothing but hope and a blazer ironed with a pot of boiling water. The waiting area on the 47th floor was designed for silence. 4 leather chairs lined against a glass wall overlooking the Atlanta skyline. A low table with a single orchid in a white ceramic pot. Ambient lighting that hummed at a frequency meant to calm nerves, but somehow made everything feel more clinical. 3 other candidates sat waiting. A man in his early 30s navy, suit brown Oxfords, polished to glass a leather portfolio resting on his knee with a gold monogram on the corner. A woman, maybe 28 pencil, skirt, silk blouse, laptop open on her thighs, fingers moving across the keyboard like she was already working before she'd been hired. A second man, older gray, at the temples, reading something on his phone with the relaxed posture of someone who had options and knew it. Shaniqua sat at the end of the row, Caleb beside her, Spider-Man backpack on the floor between his feet. He had the coloring book open on his lap and was working on a page with a fire truck filling in the wheels with a black crayon staying mostly inside the lines. He was quiet, perfectly quiet, exactly the way she'd asked him to be. But quiet didn't matter, because everyone in that room had already seen everything they needed to see. The man with the portfolio glanced at Caleb, then at Shaniqua, then back at his portfolio. His jaw tightened. Not anger. Something worse. Pity. The kind of pity that looks down without bending. The woman with the laptop looked up for exactly 2 seconds, then returned to her screen. But her posture shifted. She angled her body slightly away, as if proximity to Shaniqua's situation might be contagious. The older man didn't look at all. He stared straight ahead at the glass wall, deliberately, performatively, pretending the 5-year-old coloring a fire truck 3 chairs away simply did not exist. Nobody said a word. Nobody had to. The silence in that room was louder than any insult Shaniqua had ever received. She sat with her spine pressed flat against the chair. Resume folder on her lap, hands folded, eyes forward. Every muscle in her body locked into the posture of a woman who knew she was being judged and had decided to survive it by refusing to flinch. Then Caleb's elbow caught the edge of the crayon box. 24 crayons hit the marble floor. They scattered in every direction, rolling under chairs, spinning across polished stone, the sound of each one amplified by the silence into something that felt like an explosion. Shaniqua dropped to her knees immediately, hands moving fast, gathering crayons one by one. Burnt sienna under the portfolio man's chair, cerulean blue near the orchid table, forest green spinning slowly toward the elevator. Her face burned, heat rising from her chest to her neck to her cheeks like a fever she couldn't stop. Caleb whispered, "Sorry, Mama. It's okay, baby. It's okay." She picked up every single crayon. All 24. Nobody helped. Not one person moved. Not one person bent down. Not one person said, "Here, let me get that one." She placed them back in the box, hands trembling, and sat down. Caleb looked up at her with eyes that understood more than a 5-year-old should. 30 seconds later, Reginald Hayes walked through the corridor, 63 years old, 6'2", silver cufflinks, a charcoal suit that fit like it had been cut directly onto his body. He moved through the office the way a man moves through a building he considers partly his own because in many ways he did. He saw Shaniqua first, then Caleb. His stride didn't break, but his eyes narrowed. He turned to Pamela, who was standing near the reception desk, reviewing a clipboard. "Is this a daycare or a Fortune 500 company?" His voice was low, but not low enough. The words carried. "Who allowed this?" Pamela leaned in. "She had a childcare emergency, Mr. Hayes. I made a judgment call. I didn't want a scene in the lobby." Reginald looked at Caleb again. The boy was coloring, feet dangling, tongue poking out, completely unaware that his presence in this building was being treated like a breach in protocol. "Cancel her interview," Reginald said, straightening his cufflinks. "We don't need this kind of complication." Pamela nodded, set down her clipboard, took a breath, began walking toward Shaniqua, and that's when Kevin came around the corner. He was heading to his office from a meeting on the 46th floor, phone in one hand, coffee in the other. His mind was already on the quarterly projections Reginald had flagged that morning. Then he saw the boy, small, 5 years old, sitting in an oversized leather chair in the waiting area of his company, feet hanging 6 inches off the ground, coloring a fire truck with a black crayon, completely focused, completely still, a Spider-Man backpack at his feet, and beside him a woman in a navy blazer, sitting so straight it looked like her spine might snap, holding a resume folder like a shield against everything the room was throwing at her. Kevin stopped walking. "I'll handle this one," Kevin said. Pamela turned surprised. She'd been 2 steps from delivering the cancellation. "Mr. Brown, you don't need to. Mr. Hayes suggested we." "I'll handle this one," Kevin repeated. Not louder, just final. Reginald appeared behind Pamela. "Kevin, this is a waste of your time. We have 3 qualified candidates sitting right there." Kevin looked at Reginald, then at Caleb, then back at Reginald. 10 minutes, Reg." He walked past both of them and approached Shaniqua directly. Miss Collins, Shaniqua, stood immediately, her hand extended before her brain could catch up with her nerves. "Yes. Thank you for seeing me." Kevin shook her hand. Firm grip, steady. He noticed her fingers were cold. He noticed the blazer was slightly uneven at the shoulders, pressed but not professionally. He noticed the resume folder had a crease in the corner like it had been carried in a bag that was too full. "Follow me, please." The conference room was glass-walled on 2 sides, a long mahogany table with 8 chairs, a whiteboard, a screen for presentations. The Atlanta skyline stretched beyond the windows like a painting of everything money could buy. Kevin sat at the head of the table. Shaniqua sat across from him. Caleb climbed into the chair beside his mother, put on his headphones, the ones with the cracked left ear cup, held together with tape, and opened the iPad to Bluey. Within seconds, he was gone, absorbed, silent. A 5-year-old professional at being invisible. Kevin studied the boy for a moment, the careful way he'd set up his own space. Headphones on, volume low enough that Kevin could barely hear it. Coloring book closed and tucked away so the table stayed clean. Juice box still in the backpack, not opened, not asked for. This child had done this before, sat quietly in places he didn't belong, made himself small so his mother could try to be big. Kevin turned to Shaniqua. "Miss Collins, I'll be direct. This is unusual. Why should I spend the next 10 minutes on this interview instead of moving to the next candidate?" His voice was flat, professional, testing. He expected excuses. He expected tears. He expected the kind of desperate performance that Reginald had warned him about for 15 years. Personal chaos bleeding into professional spaces. People who couldn't separate their problems from their potential. Shaniqua didn't cry. She didn't apologize again. She didn't explain her life story or ask for sympathy. She answered, "I have 4 years of experience as an administrative coordinator in healthcare staffing. I manage scheduling for 43 field nurses across 12 facilities. I'm SAP certified. I was employee of the quarter twice in 3 years. My company lost a major contract and eliminated 200 positions. I was one of them. Her voice was steady, not rehearsed, just clear. My babysitter got sick this morning at 6:30. I had no backup. I could have called and rescheduled, but this was the only slot available. So I prepared my son with everything he needs to sit quietly for 30 minutes, and I came anyway. She paused, met his eyes. I understand if this disqualifies me, but I'm here because I couldn't afford not to be. Kevin blinked. Reginald's voice echoed in his skull. Personal chaos is a preview of professional chaos. But the woman sitting in front of him wasn't chaotic. She was composed, prepared, direct. She'd answered his question with credentials, not excuses. With facts, not feelings. That wasn't what he'd expected, not even close. Tell me about your workflow at your previous company, he said, leaning back slightly. Shaniqua walked him through it. Scheduling protocols, compliance tracking, how she'd built a color-coded system in SAP that reduced double booking errors by 31%, how she'd trained 4 new hires in their first quarter and all 4 passed their 90-day reviews, how she'd managed the transition when the company switched from paper timesheets to digital and half the nursing staff resisted the change. She spoke the way someone speaks about work they loved, not bragging, just knowing. The kind of competence that doesn't need volume because it has depth. Kevin picked up a pen, started writing notes on the margin of her resume. He hadn't written a single note during the first 3 interviews that morning. Not one. Reginald's voice whispered again. She's a liability, a complication, a risk. But Kevin's pen kept moving. Because the woman in front of him wasn't a complication. She was the most prepared candidate he'd seen all day. And she'd done it while ironing her blazer with a pot of boiling water and packing a Spider-Man backpack with enough supplies to keep a 5-year-old silent through an interview at a billion-dollar company. 12 minutes in. Kevin had already gone past his promised 10. He was asking about her approach to vendor management when Caleb quietly pulled off his headphones. He tugged Shaniqua's sleeve. Gentle, small fingers on navy fabric. "Mama," he whispered, leaning close. "I need to go bathroom." Shaniqua froze. Every muscle in her body locked. This was the moment she'd been dreading since she walked through the lobby doors. The one variable she couldn't control. The one thing that would prove everyone in that waiting room right. She turned to Kevin, her voice cracking at the edges despite every effort to hold it together. "I'm so sorry Kevin stood up. Shaniqua's heart dropped. This was it. He was ending the interview. She could see the polite dismissal forming on his lips, the professional regret, the thank you for your time that meant you were never really in the running. But Kevin didn't walk toward her. He walked toward the door. Opened it. Looked at Pamela, who was sitting at the desk just outside. "Show her son to the restroom, please. And get him a juice box from the break room. Apple if we have it." Pamela stared at him. Her pen stopped mid-sentence on whatever she'd been writing. Kevin nodded, his voice quiet. "He's 5, Pamela. He needs to go to the bathroom." Pamela stood slowly, still processing, and walked into the conference room with the careful smile of a woman, recalculating everything she thought she knew about her boss. Caleb looked up at Shaniqua. "Is it okay, Mama?" Shaniqua nodded. Her throat had closed around words she couldn't find. Caleb slid off the chair, grabbed his Spider-Man backpack because he never left it behind ever, took Pamela's hand, and just before he walked out the door, he turned back and waved. "I'll be right back, Mama. You're doing great." 6 words. Spoken by a 5-year-old who didn't understand stock valuations or quarterly projections or the politics of corporate hiring. A child who only knew one thing for certain. His mama was in an important meeting, and she needed to know she was doing a good job. Shaniqua held it together for exactly 3 seconds after the door closed. Then the tears came. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a slow, quiet spill. The kind that starts behind the eyes and breaks through despite every wall built to stop it. She pressed her fingers to her lips, trying to hold the sound in. She wasn't crying because she was sad. She was crying because her son, her 5-year-old son, the boy who ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner 3 nights a week and wore shoes with a flapping sole, was cheering her on in a job interview at a billion-dollar company. And instead of throwing them out, the CEO had asked for apple juice. Kevin sat back down. He said nothing for a long moment. He let the silence hold. Then in a voice so different from the one he'd started with that it almost sounded like a different man, he said, "Take your time, Miss Collins. We're not in a rush." And for the first time since he'd walked into this conference room with the intention of confirming everything Reginald had ever taught him, Kevin Brown felt something shift in his chest. Something old, something buried, something that had been lying face down in the dark for years. He was looking at Shaniqua, but he was seeing Dorothy. Not her face, not her clothes, not the surface. He was seeing the way Shaniqua had watched Caleb walk out of that room. The look, half protective, half breaking. The look of a woman carrying the entire sky on her shoulders who couldn't let anyone see her arms shaking. His mother had worn that same look every night she brought him to work. Every hallway, every supply closet, every office floor she scrubbed while her son did homework 3 feet away. If this moment is hitting you, subscribe for more stories like this. Now let's continue. The interview ended 14 minutes after Caleb left the room. Shaniqua thanked Kevin, shook his hand, gathered Caleb from the break room where Pamela had given him not just the apple juice box but a granola bar and a sheet of printer paper he'd covered in crayon drawings of rockets. They left through the lobby. Caleb waved at the receptionist. The receptionist waved back, this time a real wave, not a calculated one. And then they were gone. Kevin didn't go back to his office. He stayed in the conference room, door closed, light still on. Shaniqua's resume still sitting on the table where he'd left it, covered in notes he didn't usually write for candidates he wasn't supposed to care about. Reginald walked in 4 minutes later. He didn't knock. He never knocked. So he said, settling into the chair across from Kevin, with the ease of a man who'd sat in that exact chair 1,000 times. "We're going with candidate number 2, right? The Georgia Tech kid. Clean resume. No baggage." Kevin didn't answer. Reginald studied him. "Kevin, don't tell me you're seriously considering the woman who brought her kid to a job interview. That's a liability. That's an HR incident waiting to happen." Kevin looked at the resume, then at the window, then at something that wasn't in the room at all. "My mother brought me to every cleaning job she ever worked," he said quietly. Reginald's face shifted, just slightly. A crack in the composure. "I sat in hallways," Kevin continued, "in break rooms, in supply closets. I did homework on the floor of office buildings my mother scrubbed at midnight." The room was silent. Somewhere far below, 47 floors down the city, moved horns, engines, the sound of a world that didn't pause for memories. Kevin could see it clearly now, clearer than he'd seen it in years. A hallway, fluorescent lights, humming, the smell of pine sol and industrial cleaner. 7-year-old Kevin cross-legged on linoleum pencil in hand multiplication tables spread across the floor, and Dorothy, his mother, pushing a mop 3 times her weight, pausing between rooms to lean over and check his work. "You're gonna sit behind one of these desks someday, baby," she'd said, her voice tired but certain. Not under them, behind them. She died believing that, and she'd been right. Her son sat behind a desk that cost $14,000 on the 47th floor of a building with his name on it. But somewhere between the supply closets and the corner office, Kevin had forgotten who put him there. Reginald said nothing. He didn't know this story. Kevin had never told it. Not to Reginald. Not to journalists. Not to the Forbes reporter who'd spent 3 days profiling him. He'd locked it away the same way he'd turned that photograph face down. Kevin stood, picked up the resume, walked out of the conference room without another word. He went to his office, closed the door, sat behind his $14,000 desk, and opened the bottom drawer where he kept files he hadn't touched in months. He pulled out Shaniqua's full application. Read it again, every line. Administrative coordinator, 4 years, healthcare staffing, SAP certified, employee of the quarter twice, managed scheduling for 43 field nurses, company downsized, 200 positions eliminated. She was one of them. He set the file down, looked at the tarnished silver frame in the corner of his desk. Dorothy in her cleaning uniform. 7-year-old Kevin with the missing teeth and the gold star. The photograph still faced the wall. She wasn't unqualified. She was unlucky. And Kevin knew the difference because he'd been unlucky once too, until someone gave him a chance he hadn't earned yet. That evening, Shaniqua sat on the edge of the pull-out couch in her studio apartment. Caleb was asleep beside her, curled around his one-eyed dinosaur, still wearing his sneakers because he'd fallen asleep on the bus ride home before she could take them off. The left sole had flapped open again. She could see his sock through the gap. The blazer hung on the back of the door. Same hook, same spot. She stared at it the way a soldier stares at a uniform after a battle. They're not sure they survived. She replayed the interview in her head, frame by frame, mistake by mistake. She'd brought her child to a corporate office. She'd cried in front of a CEO. She'd let her 5-year-old interrupt a job interview to ask for the bathroom. She'd shown every crack in her armor to a man who ran a billion-dollar company and probably hadn't thought about her once since she walked out of the building. It was over. She knew it was over. The stack of envelopes on the kitchen counter hadn't moved. The landlord's final notice still sat third from the top. Rent was due in 8 days now, $41 in her account. Nothing in the pipeline. Nothing left to try. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and let the quiet press in around her like water. Her phone buzzed on the mattress. She almost didn't look. At this hour, it was either a robocall or a collection agency. Either way, nothing that would help. Nothing that ever helped. She glanced at the screen. Unknown number. Atlanta area code. She let it ring twice. 3 times. Then picked up, expecting the worst. Because expecting the worst was the only thing that hadn't disappointed her in months. Miss Collins, this is Kevin Brown. Her body went still. The kind of still where even your blood seems to pause. I'm calling to offer you the position, he said. Full-time. Benefits starting day 1. Shaniqua opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She pressed her hand against her chest as if she needed to physically hold her heart in place. Mr. Brown won. She stopped. Started again. Are you sure? After today, I thought. After today is exactly why I'm calling. His voice was different on the phone. Quieter, less CEO, more human. Like a man who'd spent the last several hours arguing with a version of himself he no longer wanted to be. I've also arranged something, Kevin continued. There's a community center 10 minutes from our office that runs an after-school program. Arts tutoring, supervised recreation. I've spoken with the director. There's a spot for Caleb starting Monday. The company will cover the first 3 months. Shaniqua's hand was shaking so hard she had to switch the phone to the other ear. Mr. Brown, I can't accept that. That's too much. It's not charity, Kevin said firmly. It's an investment in a good employee. Your son is not a liability, Miss Collins. He's proof that you don't give up. The tears came, not quiet this time, not controlled. The kind of crying that starts in the belly and rises like a wave that's been building for months, held back by sheer will, finally allowed to break. Why are you doing this? She whispered. Kevin was silent for a long moment. She could hear him breathing. She could hear something shifting in the space between them. Something that traveled through phone lines and crossed the distance between a penthouse in Buckhead and a studio apartment in southeast Atlanta. Because someone did it for my mother once, he said quietly, and I forgot to pay it forward until today. The call ended 3 minutes later. Shaniqua set the phone on the mattress, sat in the dark for a full 60 seconds, letting the reality settle into bones that had been braced for bad news for so long they'd forgotten how to receive anything else. Then she stood, walked to the pull-out couch, knelt beside Caleb, who was breathing softly, his small hand resting on the dinosaur's head. She brushed the hair from his forehead, leaned close, and whispered, Tomorrow's going to be different, baby. I told you. Monday morning, 6:45. Shaniqua walked through the lobby of Brown Pinnacle Solutions for the second time. Same marble floors, same 30-foot ceilings, same steel sculpture hanging overhead like a constellation made of money. But everything else had changed. No Spider-Man backpack, no 5-year-old holding her hand, no blazer ironed with a pot of boiling water. She wore a new blouse White bought at a clearance rack for $11 the day after Kevin's call. Her hair was pulled back the same way. Her spine was just as straight. But her hands weren't shaking. She was 20 minutes early. The receptionist recognized her. The same woman from Friday. This time the smile was different. Not calculated. Not uncomfortable. Just curious. The kind of look people give when they've heard a story and want to see how it ends. Welcome back, Miss Collins. Thank you. The elevator carried her to the 47th floor. The same elevator, the same slow climb. But this time, when the doors opened, she stepped out as someone who belonged. Or at least someone who was going to fight like hell to earn the right to. Her desk was in the operations wing. Third row, near the window. A standard issue computer, a phone, a cup of pens, and a small welcome folder with her name printed on the front. And a coffee. A paper cup from the cafe downstairs, still warm, sitting on a folded piece of paper. Shaniqua picked up the note. Neat handwriting. Blue ink. First days are the hardest. You've already done the hardest part. You showed up. Welcome. Signed, Denise. Shaniqua didn't know who Denise was yet. She would. Denise Carter, 36 years old. Head of Operations Coordination. Single mother of a 9-year-old daughter named Ava. The only other person on the 47th floor who understood what it meant to pack a lunch at 5:30 in the morning, drop a child at school by 7:15, and still make it to a desk before anyone noticed you were carrying the weight of 2 lives on one salary. But that was later. Right now, Shaniqua held the coffee in both hands, the way you hold something warm when everything around you has been cold for a very long time, and she let herself breathe. The whispers started before lunch. She heard them the way you hear traffic from inside an apartment. Constant, low, just present enough to remind you the world outside had opinions. Conversations that stopped mid-sentence when she walked into the break room. A woman from accounting who smiled at her and then turned to her colleague with raised eyebrows as soon as Shaniqua passed. 2 men by the copy machine, whose voices dropped the moment she rounded the corner. She knew what they were saying. She didn't need to hear the words. The story had traveled faster than any memo. The woman who brought her kid to the interview. The single mom, Kevin Brown, hired personally. The one Reginald Hayes tried to cancel before she even sat down. She was a headline before she was a colleague. At 11:15, Reginald found her in the hallway. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. She recognized him from the waiting room. The silver cufflinks. The voice that had called her son a complication. Miss Collins, Mr. Hayes. He looked at her, the way a man looks at a new piece of furniture he didn't approve of. Evaluating. Measuring. Deciding where it fit, or if it fit at all. I hope you know the bar is higher for you, he said. Not cruel. Just cold. The way a fact is cold. Kevin took a risk. Don't make him regret it. Shaniqua held his gaze. She didn't flinch. She didn't explain. She didn't justify her presence in a building she'd been told she didn't belong in. I won't, she said. Then she turned and walked back to her desk. Spine straight, chin level. The same posture she'd carried into the lobby on Friday, except now it wasn't armor. It was her. During her lunch break, she stepped outside and called the after-school center. Caleb had been there for 3 hours. The coordinator said he was adjusting well, had already made 2 friends. Was currently painting a picture with a boy named Deshaun. Can I talk to him? Shaniqua asked. Mama Caleb's voice burst through the phone like sunlight through a crack in a wall. I drew you in your office. You have a big desk, and a window, and flowers on your desk, because you like flowers. Shaniqua pressed the phone against her ear and closed her eyes. She was standing on a sidewalk in downtown Atlanta, surrounded by people in suits who would never know her name, holding a phone with a cracked screen, listening to her 5-year-old describe an office that didn't look anything like her real one, but it looked exactly like the one he believed she deserved. 3 months passed. In that time, Shaniqua Collins didn't just meet expectations. She dismantled them and rebuilt something better in their place. She restructured the entire scheduling workflow for the operations department, replaced a manual tracking system that had been limping along for 2 years with a color-coded protocol in SAP that any new hire could learn in a single afternoon. Order processing time dropped by 22% in her first 60 days. Error rate dropped by 31%. The department hadn't run this clean in years. Denise Carter walked into Kevin's office on a Thursday morning and closed the door behind her. She's the best hire you've made in 2 years, Denise said, settling into the chair across from his desk. And I'm including myself in that list. Kevin looked up from his laptop. That good better. She rebuilt our scheduling system from scratch without being asked. Trained 3 new team members without a single complaint. And she stays later than anyone on the floor. Kevin nodded. But something behind the nod didn't sit right. Staying later than anyone on the floor wasn't a compliment, not when you had a 5-year-old waiting for you somewhere else. That Friday evening, Kevin was leaving his office at 6:45. The floor was nearly empty. Lights dimmed in most of the cubicles, cleaning crew already working the far end of the hallway. And there, at her desk, third row near the window, Shaniqua sat with the glow of her monitor, painting her face blue-white in the growing dark. "Why are you still here?" Kevin asked, stopping at her desk. Shaniqua didn't look up right away. She finished typing a line, saved the file, then turned. "I want to make sure the monthly report is perfect. It's already perfect. I read the draft this morning. Go home to your son." Something flickered across her face. Not defiance, something deeper. Something that looked like fear wearing the mask of dedication. "Mr. Brown, with all due respect, I can't afford to be just good enough. Not with my story. I have to be undeniable." The word hit Kevin like a closed fist to the sternum. Undeniable. Not good. Not qualified. Not capable. Undeniable. Because good wasn't enough for someone who walked through the door carrying the wrong story. Because qualified came with an asterisk when your first impression involved a Spider-Man backpack and a 5-year-old asking for the bathroom. Because capable meant nothing in a building full of people whispering about how you got here. She had to be twice as good to be seen as equal. And she knew it, and she accepted it. And she ran that treadmill every single day without complaint, because the alternative was going back to a studio apartment with $41 in the bank and a landlord counting down the days. Kevin drove home that night in silence. No radio, no phone calls. Just the hum of the engine and a question he couldn't shake. How many Shaniquas had he missed? How many women had walked into his building, carrying everything they had, only to be turned away by a system that measured readiness by whether your childcare held up on a Friday morning? He started looking into it, not as a CEO reviewing policies, as a man confronting a blind spot he'd chosen not to see. 70% of single mothers in the American workforce reported choosing between childcare and career advancement at least once a year. 1 in 3 left a job because they couldn't find reliable, affordable childcare. The average cost of daycare in Georgia was $1,230 a month, nearly equal to the average rent. These weren't statistics. These were women ironing blazers with pots of boiling water. These were mothers packing Spider-Man backpacks with crayons and juice boxes and prayers that their 5-year-old would stay quiet long enough for them to prove they were worth hiring. These were women like Shaniqua, like Denise, like Dorothy, and Kevin's company, a company built by the son of a cleaning lady who brought her child to work because she had no other choice, had no childcare policy at all. Shaniqua sat at her desk, working into the dark, trying to be undeniable. And Kevin sat in his car engine, idling in his penthouse garage, realizing that undeniable shouldn't be the requirement. Showing up should be enough. It had been enough for him once, when someone gave a cleaning lady's son a chance he hadn't earned yet. Month 5, a Tuesday, 7:14 in the morning. Shaniqua's phone rang. The after-school center. Caleb had a fever of 102, ear infection. They couldn't keep him. She needed to pick him up immediately. Shaniqua stared at her screen. The weekly operations report was due by noon. She had a meeting with a new vendor at 10. Denise was out sick herself, which meant Shaniqua was covering 2 desks. She picked up Caleb within the hour, took him to the urgent care clinic on Moreland Avenue. Ear infection, left ear moderate, antibiotics prescribed, rest required. No school or group programs for at least 48 hours. Shaniqua called the office from the clinic parking lot, while Caleb slept in the back seat, his face flushed, his small hand still holding the crayon drawing he'd been working on when the fever hit. A fire truck, half-colored, red and black. "I need to take 2 days, she told the floor coordinator. "My son is sick." She spent those 2 days on the couch with Caleb on her lap, a blanket over both of them, his forehead warm against her collarbone. She gave him his medicine every 6 hours. She read him 3 chapters of a book about a dog who solved mysteries. She held him when the pain in his ear made him cry at 2 in the morning. And, between all of that, she worked. Laptop balanced on the arm of the couch. Report finished by 11 the first night. Vendor follow-up emails sent by 6 the next morning. Data reconciliation completed during Caleb's afternoon nap. She worked the way a woman works when she knows the world is watching and waiting for her to fail. Nobody at the office knew. Nobody asked. Reginald Hayes brought it up at the Thursday leadership meeting. Kevin sat at the head of the table, 8 department heads around him, quarterly projections on the screen behind him. Reginald didn't wait for his turn. 2 days absent, he said, clicking his pen against the table. No advance notice. This is exactly what I warned about. Personal disruptions affecting workflow. We have KPIs, Kevin. We have standards. The room went quiet. Everyone knew who he was talking about. Kevin felt the pull. 2 directions. The CEO in him understood Reginald's concern. Attendance mattered. Reliability mattered. A company couldn't run on compassion alone. But the other part of him, the part that had been waking up in the middle of the night thinking about supply closets and the smell of pine sol, that part had a different calculation running entirely. Has her work suffered? Kevin asked. Reginald paused. That's not the point. Has her work suffered? Kevin repeated. Silence. Pull up her output from the last 2 days, Kevin said to the operations coordinator, sitting 3 chairs down. The numbers appeared on the screen. Weekly report submitted on time. Vendor correspondence completed. Data reconciliation finished. 90% of her workload handled remotely, while her son ran a fever of 102 and cried in her arms at 2 in the morning. Nobody in that room knew that last part, but Kevin could see it in the report. In the timestamps. 11:18 p.m., 6:04 a.m., 2:37 p.m. She'd worked around a sick child the way her body worked around a bruise, carefully, painfully, without stopping. When Shaniqua walked into the office on day 3, she went straight to Kevin's door. She didn't sit down. She placed a manila folder on his desk. The completed monthly reconciliation report, 3 days ahead of schedule. Kevin looked at the folder. Then at Shaniqua, dark circles under her eyes. Hair pulled back in a knot that looked like it had been done in 30 seconds. Blazer slightly wrinkled, but standing straight. Always standing straight. She didn't just meet the bar. She moved it. While her son was sick, while she was alone, while nobody expected her to. Kevin called a leadership meeting that afternoon. Not the regular one, a special session. All department heads, Reginald included. We have a childcare problem, Kevin said, standing at the head of the table. Not her, us. Our system doesn't support our people. And if we lose someone this good because we can't figure out backup childcare, that's a failure of leadership, not a failure of parenting. The room was still. 8 faces processing a sentence their CEO had never spoken before. A sentence that didn't sound like policy. It sounded like confession. Reginald opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time in 15 years of working beside Kevin Brown, Reginald Hayes had nothing to say. 2 weeks after that leadership meeting, Kevin hired an outside consultant to study the childcare gap at Brown Pinnacle Solutions. Not a PR firm, not a branding agency, a workforce analyst who specialized in employee retention and family support infrastructure. The report came back in 11 days, 47 pages. Kevin read every one. The numbers were brutal in their clarity. The cost of establishing a childcare partnership with a licensed daycare center, 3 blocks from the office, combined with a small on-site backup care room for mild illness days and school holidays, came to approximately $100 and $80,000 per year. That included subsidized fees, staffing, liability insurance, and administrative overhead. The cost of losing a high-performing employee due to lack of childcare factoring in recruitment, onboarding training, lost productivity during the vacancy, and reduced team morale averaged approximately $340,000 per incident. And Brown Pinnacle had lost 4 employees to childcare-related resignations in the last 18 months alone. Kevin sat with those numbers for a long time. $180,000 to keep people, $340,000 to replace them. This wasn't compassion versus business. This was bad math hiding behind good intentions. He brought it to the board on a Wednesday morning, 8 members around the mahogany table. Reginald sat at the far end, arms crossed, the posture of a man who already knew what was coming and had already decided to oppose it. Kevin presented the data. Clean, direct, no emotion. Just numbers on a screen and a proposal on paper. Reginald spoke first. This isn't a charity, Kevin. Kevin didn't blink. No, it's math. $180,000 to save $340,000 isn't charity. It's strategy. And if the best people we can hire happen to be parents, and most of them are, then we either support them or lose them. Your choice? The room was silent for 6 seconds. Kevin counted. The vote passed 7-1. Within 60 days, Brown Pinnacle Solutions launched a childcare partnership program. Employees who were single parents received 60% subsidy on daycare costs at 2 partnered centers within a 15-minute radius of the office. A backup care room was built on the 44th floor, staffed by a licensed childcare provider available for children with mild illness or unexpected school closures. Flexible scheduling was offered to single parents, allowing adjusted start and end times to accommodate school drop-offs and pickups. Kevin asked Shaniqua to consult on the program design. She stared at him. I'm not a policy expert. I don't need a consultant to tell me what parents need, Kevin said. I need a parent. Shaniqua spent 3 evenings reviewing the draft policy. She crossed out a clause that required single parents to submit proof of custody status, flagging it as invasive and unnecessary. She added a provision for emergency transportation vouchers on days when a child's pickup fell during work hours. She suggested a buddy system where parents in the company could cover for each other during school events. Every suggestion came from experience. Every change came from a scar. Denise Carter was the first employee to formally enroll in the program. She walked into Shaniqua's cubicle that afternoon with 2 cups of coffee and a look on her face that lived somewhere between disbelief and gratitude. "You didn't just get yourself a job," Denise said. "You changed how this whole building works." Shaniqua shook her head. "I didn't do anything. I just showed up." Denise set the coffee down, looked her in the eye. "That's exactly what you did. And sometimes showing up is the revolution." 8 months after the interview, Shaniqua had been promoted to team lead. Her desk was no longer in the 3rd row. She had a small office now glass-walled near the operations wing. Not a corner office, not yet, but a door that closed and a nameplate with her name on it, and that was more than enough. Caleb had started kindergarten at a public school 4 blocks from the after-school center. He was reading now, not perfectly, but with the fierce concentration of a child who'd been told books were important and had decided to believe it. He brought his reading logs home every Friday like trophies, spreading them across the kitchen table, pointing at each checked box with pride. "I read 6 books this week, Mama. 6. That's amazing, baby. Mr. Kevin should know. He'd be proud. Kevin, not Mr. Brown." Somewhere in the last 8 months, Kevin had become Mr. Kevin, a title that lived between formality and family, given by a child who didn't understand corporate hierarchy and didn't care to learn. On a Tuesday in October, Shaniqua had to work a late shift to cover a vendor crisis. She called the after-school center to arrange extended pickup. She called Kevin's assistant to confirm the schedule change. But Kevin had already handled it. He'd seen the conflict on the shared calendar and made a decision before anyone asked. He drove to Caleb's school at 3:15 for the Reading Circle event Shaniqua had signed up for weeks ago. He sat in a small plastic chair in a classroom that smelled like crayons and hand sanitizer, surrounded by parents half his age and twice his patience, and he listened. Caleb stood at the front of the class, held his book with both hands, cleared his throat the way he'd seen important people do on television, and he read, slowly, carefully. 2323, stumbling over the word adventure, pronouncing it ad-venture. With 3 hard syllables and complete confidence. He mispronounced beautiful as be-beautiful. He skipped a line and had to go back. Kevin clapped louder than anyone in the room, louder than any board meeting applause, louder than any investor presentation ovation. The sound of a man discovering what it felt like to be proud of something that had nothing to do with money. After the event, Caleb ran to Kevin in the hallway, grabbed his hand, and walked beside him toward the parking lot. His small fingers wrapped around 2 of Kevin's like they'd done this 100 times. "Mr. Kevin, are you my mama's boss?" "Yes, I am." "Is she doing a good job?" Kevin looked down at the boy. 5 years old. Sneakers finally new, no more flapping soles. Spider-Man backpack faded but still proudly worn. Eyes wide and serious. "She's doing an incredible job, Caleb." Caleb nodded. "The gravity of a Supreme Court justice." "Good. She works really hard. Sometimes she's tired, but she says it's worth it, 'cause of me." Kevin made it to his car, started the engine, pulled out of the school parking lot, drove exactly 3 blocks before he had to pull over because he couldn't see the road through the water in his eyes. He sat there for a long time, engine running, hands on the wheel. A 41-year-old CEO crying on a side street in Atlanta because a 5-year-old had said his mama was tired, but it was worth it because of him. He drove home, walked into his penthouse, didn't turn on the lights, went straight to his desk, and reached for the tarnished silver frame in the corner. Dorothy, cleaning uniform, dark blue with the company logo stitched above the pocket, smiling wide, her arm around 7-year-old Kevin, who was missing 2 front teeth and holding a spelling test with a gold star. The photograph had faced the wall for years. Kevin picked it up, turned it around, looked at his mother's face for the first time in longer than he wanted to admit. She was beautiful, tired and beautiful. The way women are beautiful when they've spent their whole lives pouring themselves into someone else and somehow still have enough left to smile. He set the frame down in the center of his desk, not the corner, not behind the reports, the center. "You brought me to work because you had no one," he said to the empty room, "and I was ashamed of that for 20 years. His voice cracked on the word ashamed. He let it. "I'm not ashamed anymore, Mama. I understand now." 1 year after the interview. The company auditorium on the 2nd floor. 230 employees seated in rows, department heads along the sides, board members in the back, press from 2 local outlets near the door. Kevin stood at the podium. Navy suit. No notes. Just a microphone and a truth he'd been building toward for 12 months. "Thank you all for being here," he began. His voice was steady. His hands were not. "I'm here to announce something that's been a long time coming. Longer than most of you know." He paused, looked out at the room, found Shaniqua in the front row. She wore a charcoal blazer she'd bought with her own paycheck. Not from a thrift store, not ironed with a pot of boiling water. Bought new. Earned. Beside her sat Caleb, 6 years old now, small button-down shirt tucked into khakis, hair freshly cut. On his lap, held carefully with both hands, was a crayon drawing on printer paper. A woman sitting at a big desk, smiling, flowers on the desk, a window behind her, and in the corner of the drawing in wobbly letters the word Mama. "Today, Brown Pinnacle Solutions is launching the Dorothy Brown Initiative," Kevin said. "Named after my mother." He stopped, took a breath. And for the first time in his professional career, Kevin Brown told the truth about where he came from. "My mother was a cleaning lady," he said. "She scrubbed the floors of office buildings for 23 years. She raised me alone. No husband, no family nearby, no backup plan. And on the nights she couldn't find someone to watch me, she brought me with her. I sat in hallways, in break rooms, in supply closets. I did my homework on the floor while my mother mopped around me." The room was completely still. 230 people breathing quietly, watching their CEO crack open a door he'd kept locked for decades. "She used to stop between rooms." Kevin continued, his voice rough at the edges. "Lean on the mop handle. Look at my homework." And she'd say, "You're gonna sit behind one of these desks someday, baby. Not under them, behind them." He gripped the edges of the podium. She was right. I sit behind a $14,000 desk on the 47th floor of a building with my name on it. But somewhere between the supply closets and the corner office, I forgot who put me there. He looked at Shaniqua. 1 year ago, a woman walked into this building with her 5-year-old son because she had no other choice. And I almost let her walk out. I almost chose policy over people. I almost became the kind of man my mother cleaned floors for. The silence in that room was so heavy it had weight. The Dorothy Brown Initiative will provide child care support, job training, and emergency assistance to single parents in this community. Not as charity, not as PR, as a promise. A promise that this company will never again look at a parent carrying their child and see a complication. We will see courage. We will see resilience. We will see exactly the kind of person we want working here. Kevin turned to Shaniqua. "You didn't just prove you deserved the job. You proved this company needed to be better. You held up a mirror I'd been avoiding for 20 years. Shaniqua's eyes were streaming. She didn't wipe them. She didn't need to. These weren't tears of shame. These were tears of being seen. Then Caleb stood up. He slid off his chair, walked to the front of the room with the careful determination of a child on a mission, and stood directly in front of Kevin. He held out the drawing with both hands. "This is for your office, mister. Kevin. So you can see Mama smiling every day." Kevin knelt down, took the drawing. His throat closed around every word he tried to form. He swallowed twice before he could speak. Thank you, Caleb. I'll put it right next to the picture of my mama. Caleb smiled, then wrapped his arms around Kevin's neck. Small arms, fierce grip, the hug of a child who doesn't understand corporate policy, but understands love with absolute certainty. You're like family now, right, Mama? Caleb said, his face pressed against Kevin's shoulder. Shaniqua nodded. Right, baby. He's family. At the back of the auditorium, standing near the door, Reginald Hayes watched. His arms were at his sides. His expression was unreadable. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he brought his hands together. One clap, then another, then faster. The room followed. 230 people rising to their feet, the sound swelling like a wave that starts as a ripple and builds until it fills every corner of the room. Reginald Hayes, 63 years old, Chief Operating Officer, the man who had built his career on the belief that personal chaos was a preview of professional chaos, stood in the back of that auditorium and applauded a single mother, a 5-year-old boy, and a CEO who'd finally remembered where he came from. His voice, the one that had whispered warnings in Kevin's head for 15 years, was completely silent now. The strongest people aren't the ones who never fall. They're the ones who fall and still iron their only blazer with a pot of boiling water pack, a Spider-Man backpack with crayons and juice boxes, and walk into a room that wasn't built for them because their child is watching, and giving up was never an option. Shaniqua Collins walked into that building carrying her son because she had no babysitter. She walked out carrying something she hadn't held in months, hope. And Kevin Brown, the CEO, who almost turned her away, walked out carrying something he hadn't felt in decades, purpose. Sometimes, the person who changes your life doesn't come in a suit. Sometimes, they come in a second-hand blazer with a 5-year-old holding their hand. This story is fictional, but the struggle is real. In the United States, there are nearly 10 million single mothers in the workforce. 70% of them report having to choose between childcare and career advancement at least once a year. 1 in 3 has left a job because affordable, reliable childcare simply didn't exist. The average cost of daycare in America is over $1,200 a month, nearly equal to the average rent in most cities. And every single day, women walk into job interviews carrying the invisible weight of a system that wasn't designed for them. If you or someone you know is a single parent navigating this reality, organizations like United Way, local workforce development programs, and state child care assistance programs can help. They exist, they're real, and they're waiting for you to call. If you're a single parent watching this, hear me clearly. You are not a liability. You are not unprofessional. You are doing the work of 2 people, and any company smart enough to see that will be lucky to have you. This story was written to honor every parent who has ever had to make an impossible choice between their career and their child. The names and events are fictional, but the emotions are real. I believe stories like this matter. Not because they solve problems, but because they remind us to look at people, really look at them before we judge what we think we see. If this story changed how you see someone even for a moment, then it did its job. Thank you for watching. If this story moved, you take a few seconds to subscribe, like, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you're a single parent, leave a comment. Tell us your story. You deserve to be heard. See you on the next one.